My name is Tony Payan. I'm the director of the Mexico Center at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. As you know, Mexico is fast approaching a critical year in its political life. On July 1st, 2018, the country will hold elections to choose a new president and to renew both chambers of Congress. And all but two of the 32 states, will hold local elections. There'll be over 3,000 elected posts in Mexico up for grabs. The 2018 elections are critical for several reasons. First, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI, which ruled Mexico for over 70 years in the 20th century, returned to power in 2012 and is ending a controversial term filled with the promise of structural economic reforms, but racked by corruption and shaken by changing international political landscapes. Second, the National Action Party, or PAN, which governed Mexico between 2000 and 2012, has not been able to increase the electoral base and will likely need to broaden its appeal and cobble together a wider political coalition if it wishes to return to power. And third, there is a new emergent national party, the National Regeneration Movement, or Morena, which has taken the breath out of the moderate left, the PRD, or Revolutionary Democratic Party, which now stands to lose ground to Morena as a consolidated left, and is in fact the leading contender for the presidency and poised to make significant advances in the national political landscape. A triumph by Morena would constitute a seismic shift in Mexican politics, because the party is proposing a return to an economic model that is considerably more nationalistic in its approach and advocates for a stronger stand in the face of the Trump administration's more hostile tone toward Mexico. In some ways, the electoral triumph of Morena would constitute Mexico's response to the rise of economic nationalism and radical politics and anti-globalism throughout the world. Thus, the stage is set as parties from the right and the left position themselves to enter a very competitive election, one which promises to ratify Mexico's economic and political system of the last 35 years or to change course radically. Yet, for the last 20 years, Mexican voters have proven very wise, confirming the adage that electorates collectively can be wiser and more rational than any one individual voter. And they will likely exercise that wisdom again in 2018, either ratifying the PRI and its allies, giving a vote of confidence to the PAN to return it to power, or signaling their desire for a more radical change in the economic and political model by voting for Morena and its allies. To explore these different scenarios and its implications for the future of Mexico and the binational relationship between the United States and Mexico, the center here at the Baker Institute has begun a series of lectures dealing with the Mexican elections. These lectures will span through the summer of 2018. Today, you will be listening to our inaugural lecture by one of the potential presidential candidates, Dr. Luis Ernesto Derbez. On October 10th, we will follow this lecture with a panel on the upcoming Mexican elections and the content of the various party platforms on topics of interest to Mexicans, including security, infrastructure, energy, trade, and Mexico's foreign policy, among others. But now, let me introduce our guest tonight. Dr. Luis Ernesto Derbez Bautista has served as president of the University of Las Americas in Puebla since 2008. Dr. Derbez served as Secretary of the Economy between 2000 and 2002 and Secretary of Foreign Affairs between 2003 and 2006. He also served as Secretary for International Relations between 2007 and 2008 and National Advisor between 2008 and 2009 for the National Action Party, or Partido Acción Nacional. He declared his intention to seek the party's nomination for president of Mexico in May of 2017. Dr. Derbez has also served as the director of the Economics Department and president of the Center on Globalization, Competitiveness, and Democracy of the Tecnológico de Monterrey, and adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins University, and as an academic vice president for the university in Puebla, UDLAP. From 1983 to 1997, he worked at the World Bank, overseeing operations in Latin America and Asia, especially in Chile, Peru, Argentina, Central America, Central Africa, and West Central India and Nepal. From 2000 to 2002, he was president of the Salt Export Administrative Council and the Transportadora de Sal S.A., public-private partnership between the government of Mexico and Mitsubishi Corporation of Japan. From 2000 to 2006, he represented the government of Mexico in the boards of Pemex, Nafinsa, Bancomext, and CONACYT. Dr. Derbez has received numerous awards and recognitions, including the Distinguished Achievement Alumni Award in 2006 by Iowa State University, the first time it was offered to a non-U.S. citizen, and the Distinguished Alumni Award in 2007 by the University of Oregon. He holds a PhD in economics from Iowa State University, a master's degree in economics from the University of Oregon, and a bachelor's degree from the Universidad Autónoma de San Luis Potosí. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce then to you our inaugural speaker, Dr. Luis Ernesto Derbez. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank all of you for being here with me, and thank you very much, Tony, for the invitation. As you know, probably you don't know, but about 2.5 months ago, I decided to throw my hat into the ring and see whether I could become or not the next presidential nominee of my party, National Action Party. This was a very difficult decision, mostly because I'm enjoying what I'm doing right now tremendously. And the fact that I will stop doing that as of Monday, next week, is something that really makes me sad, because it is the greatest job that I had in many, many years. I mean, this is the job I really enjoyed doing. So why quit that nice job and go into a job that will pay me less, that will also give me a tremendous amount of grief, and that probably will become, one of the toughest assignments in my life? And the reason is because I haven't heard from anyone trying to become president of Mexico what he or she would like to do in case that they become presidents of Mexico. The country needs answers, needs a clear path, needs clear definition of what we should be doing. But at the same time, the only one that I was able to see what he was thinking about doing, and that's the potential candidate, because right now there is no one who is a candidate in Mexico, even though we all know that Andrés Manuel López Obrador is going to become the candidate of Morena for the presidency of Mexico. He wrote a book. He didn't, but he wrote the book, yeah? And the reason why I say he obviously didn't is because most of us will not end up writing the books that we will write. As candidates, you have a team of people that will support you, write for you, do the whole thing, and then you put your name, and it becomes your manifesto. He has done that. There is a book in Mexico circulating who hasn't. I haven't seen one person that I asked for, whether they have read it or not. So I walk in all these meetings, I tell people, have you read the book of Andrés Manuel? And no one raises a hand except myself. And then on top of that, I had to buy the book, okay? So when you do these things, you really become a little bit depressed, because you ask people, if you are going to be running against this person and you haven't read what he has to say about the way that he would like to run the country, do you really feel that you should be running for the presidency of Mexico? So far, I haven't gotten anyone who has read the book among my competitors, and in addition, very few people really has read this book. It is an important book to read, because what it says clearly is that if I become president, two things, which really are the ones that will show you the kind of person that he could become, are right there. And the first one he says is, if I become president of Mexico, what I will be doing is I will be going into a referendum to ask the Mexican population whether we should go back on the energy reform that has been approved by Congress in the past 3 or 4 years. If you do that, what you are telling people is, I'm going to be asking them the answer I already know they will give me. Because the answer they will be giving me is, no, we should go back on the energy reform. Why? Because oil, gas, these resources belong to Mexicans and should be only taken profit from by Mexicans. This is what he believes very strongly in his heart, because he's a man built on the administration's point of view of the 1970s, 60s, which were the time when nationalism was the important issue in the country. So one of the things that you have to do is read a book and then find out that he's talking about going back to policies that were applied in Mexico in the 1960s, 70s of the past century. And you have a clear picture of what may happen. You may have a man running the country, thinking on policies of the past century, when she should be looking at policies of this century. Well, you already know one of those. His name is Donald Trump, and he's running this country. And what he's doing is he's thinking that going back to the policies of bringing back jobs from the manufacturing sector is what will be good for the United States, when in fact, you should know that what is good for the United States is looking at the 21st century type of industries that you should be pushing. What may end up then becoming is a very strange situation where you will have a president in the United States and a president in Mexico, both of whom look at the past as the ideal times to have the economies running together. This will be probably the worst case scenario that we can face, because at that point in time, what you're going to be facing will be this combination of the two nations and the two governments thinking that whatever you did in the 1970s, 80s is really what should be done in the 21st century. But the second thing, which is very dangerous too, is the fact that he's talking about the referendum. Because in Mexico, we don't have that figure. But he will enforce it. What he's going to do is he's going to do it. And by asking the people, what he will get as an answer will be probably, no, we should go back on that. And once you do that, there is a big danger. And the danger is, if you do it, then Congress is no longer useful. Because what you're going to be telling people is, I went and I asked the people, and the people told me what has to be done. And therefore, if you don't do the will of the people, you are not useful. Now, this is the beginning of authoritarian rule in any country. I'm sorry to say this. In your country, you are facing a little bit of that when you talk about tweets, because in fact, that's really jumping the established structure and going straight to the people and asking the people to give their opinion. When you do that, what you're looking at is very clearly, how do you bypass the system of institution that has been organized for the democratic process in the nation? The difference between Mexico and the United States is that whereas in the United States, your institutions are holding, they may be creaking, but they are holding the pace. And they are really stopping whenever there is an excess in terms of the rule of an authoritarian person trying to do something by presidential decrees. You don't have that in Mexico. So the biggest danger in my country is the fact that if you have a president with this authoritarian streak, what you may end up with is a situation where you will slowly destroy the institutional setup of democratic institutions that we have built in Mexico for the past 20 to 30 years. That, to me, is the big danger. And it comes to this process. What you have here is exactly these three aspects. You have national identity, and the one, talking about why am I fearful of people from other cultures, other processes. Then you have this concept of national sovereignty. You know, making American great means in Mexico, making Mexican great. And that implies exactly the same thing. I'm going to be proposing policies to make that. And the last one is what I call in Mexico, back to the future, okay? We are really looking at that possibility. If you go in that sense, you will have trade policies where people will say, globalization is wrong, we have to protect our industry, our economy. And in the social industrial policies in Mexico, we will call this what I call the fossilization of the economy. We're going back to this aspect of oil, gas as the major lever to reach development in Mexico. You and I know that's not going to happen for very strong reasons. One of them is fracking. The fact that you went into fracking in the United States and you developed, therefore, a new process of gas and oil production has changed completely what is the market and the conditions of the oil market in the world, gas. And so for Mexico, it makes no sense to start thinking that we're going to go back to using oil and gas as the policies. What you end up with is really this. You end up with a welfare state, protectionism, and state intervention in the economy. And this is the risk of what we're facing right now in Mexico. If Andrés Manuel were to become president of Mexico, what you will see in Mexico coming back will be all policies related to the welfare state, protectionism as the measure of how you develop your industry, your economic situation, and state intervention, participating as state. Now, many Mexicans are tired and frustrated by the current policies. And so we could really listen to the sirens, and you will end up with something like this. Andrés Manuel has already said in the past, no to the institutions. And in my guess, what we are going to be becoming will be more a country like Russia than a country like Venezuela. Now, you have heard probably people saying if Andrés Manuel becomes the president of Mexico, we'll end up in a situation like Venezuela. My answer to that is no, you won't become a country like Venezuela because you don't have the resources to do so much damage in the beginning. What you will be transforming yourself will be more Russia-like, will be a plutocracy more than that kind of situation. And that could happen in Mexico because it already happened. When did that happen in Mexico? That happened in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, at the time when you had this combination between the private sector and the public sector, looking at a country where nationalistic policies, protectionistic policies were the important policies, in the end, therefore, having a situation where you will be really looking at a country where that is going to be the agreement between the political class and the entrepreneurial class. That is a recipe for backwardness in my country, and that's something that I hope it won't happen. This is what I look at when I see the possibility of Andrés Manuel. I don't see Venezuela, I see Russia. And to me, that is the danger, okay? Having this kind of combination of plutocracy where you will have people making a lot of money, being part of the government, and the government continually becoming the government that will be forever. Look at Russia. Putin has been president or prime minister. And all he has done is he has controlled the country from one position or the other, because in the end, he is the man who rules the country. But he has adapted the whole political process to become something that will justify his positioning, his return to power, his control of power. Look at Bolivia. That's what Evo Morales did. What Evo Morales did was to create this combination where he will then be able to change the constitution and remain president by being re-elected as part of the process. So it's not that you will not have some freedom, it's that that freedom will be part of what I call a dictocracy, okay, where you will have a dictator in charge and in control. How does that is different from what we had in Mexico in the 60s and 70s? By the fact that it's going to be one-person rule. It's not going to be a party rule. What we had in Mexico was the party controlling, the person changing. That will oxygenate a little bit what was going on in the political process. When you have just one single person, then you have a completely different political system, and it's a system that may end up in collapse in the long run. But in the meantime, it becomes an authoritarian regime, and authoritarian regimes, with few exceptions, like the ones that you are watching or looking at in China, are regimes that will in turn look at nationalistic policies that will create conditions for no growth, no development in the long run. This is really the problem in Mexico. The problem is, when you look at the first sexenios, these are the terms in office of the different governments in Mexico, and you start with 1934, 1940, when Mr. Lázaro Cárdenas was the president of Mexico. what you see is a growth pattern which is very different from the one that you will see as the so-called neoliberal governments have had. Because what you see is growth patterns that go beyond 6-7% in the first sexennios up until the moment when the whole economy collapses, and then you start having these growth patterns of about 1 or 2%. The result of this is a perception in Mexico that neoliberal policies, business-friendly policies, are not really the type of policies that you should implement if you want the country to have growth and at the same time a better income distribution. This is what is giving rise to the possibility of someone like Andrés Manuel López Obrador making a presentation of his policies and having this potential effect of telling people, you see how past times were better than current times. Apply that to the fact that you have a neoliberal government starting in 1982, and the result is neoliberalism is something that we should fight against. If you add the fact that you have a tremendous income inequality in Mexico, lots of poor people, and the fact that you have very low productivity in the country right now, then the combination is ready for you to have a situation like the one that we're looking at right now. Morena becoming the party where many people see the possibilities of change, opportunity, growth, better income in the future. What policies? State welfare, state intervention. This is the big dilemma in Mexico right now, is whether we can convince the population that it's not the fault of the policies, but the fault of the people that created these conditions. Because what Andrés Manuel has been able to do very intelligently is to say, this is the mafia in power which is creating these conditions. And they are using the neoliberal policies to enrich themselves and a few people, whereas at the same time, they are impoverishing the majority of the population. We cannot continue to do that. And in fact, we can't continue to do that. We have to start changing those ideas. Because when you look at the policies that are being derided in Mexico right now, you see something like the following. For 20 years, the GDP at the state level, state by state by state, has been like this. In the blue states, which are the states in the northern central part of Mexico, has now tremendous growth rates. You have had growth rates of over 5% per year, annually, for 20 years. So if that were a country, rather than Mexico, that country, these blue states, will become one of the biggest, strongest growing countries in the world. Rates of almost 6% per year. Per year. If you go to the green states, you have growth of between 3.5%, almost 4%, 3.5% average. And then you go to the yellow ones, where you will have 2.5%, and then the rest where you will have less than 2%. Looking at Mexico from the perspective of the regional growth, you realize that the policies are giving results in the places where are being applied correctly, and the policies are not giving those results where they are not being applied correctly. That gives you an idea what we should be discussing in terms of whoever wants to be president of Mexico, thinking, how can I then make the policies that have given me blue and green rather than the policies that give me yellow and orange? And that in itself is a big difference, okay, in the discussion that we have, because the national average that you have here is 2.6% growth for those 20 years. The second thing that we know is that if I go into industrial areas rather than regions, then I have growth in the past 20 years, growth per year in the fabrication of railroads of almost 18% annually growth. Annual growth of that is far beyond whatever you can get in many others. Telecommunications, 10.9. The fabrication of cars and trucks, 9.6%. The insurance business, 8.9%. The aerospatial equipment, 7.9%. Meaning, if I look at the industries, which at the time were the industries of the future, then you can see the rate of growth of those industries being so fast, so strong, that it sends you a message. If you go back to the industrial development of the past, then you probably will not be able to grow even the 2.6% that we're reaching so far. Finally, if I look at the sophistication of our manufacturing sector, I find out that in terms of the manufacturing sector in Mexico, we are the 23rd country out of the 124. This speaks about how important manufacturing is in Mexico, how sophisticated and how competent we are in Mexico. Goes back to the discussion that President Trump has had for a while, that Mexicans have taken away from the United States the manufacturing basis, which, by the way, is true. Because what has happened is the movement of industries from the United States into Mexico, locating themselves in Mexico, and then taking advantage of the structure of Mexican labor, Mexican possibilities, by American companies producing for the United States. So in many ways, this makes a lot of sense. What we have done, what Mexico, the United States, and Canada, but mostly Mexico and the United States have done, is to link themselves in the productive sector and therefore creating a manufacturing base which is one of the strongest in the whole world. If I separate that between Mexico and the United States, I'm making a mistake, because what I'm looking at is not the integration concept of NAFTA, but rather the disintegration concept of sovereign nations rather than regional combinations. Exactly the same problem we're making in Mexico when you look at the regions. If I look region by region by region, I can see where I am applying the right policies, the right combination, because I'm having growth rates of 5% per year. But if I look at the overall country, then I'm going to say that the policies are not working because I'm only getting 2.6% growth on average. Yeah, well, that's because you're not doing the right things in those regions that are growing at less than 2% per year. Same thing here. Mexico should strive to get stronger integration with the United States, which is exactly what the United States should be doing with Mexico. How do you create stronger manufacturing bases on a combined rule? We're not doing that. We're discussing right now renegotiating NAFTA in terms that will be completely against this concept of productivity, integration, chains of value, which is the way that the modern world is moving right now. If we end up doing that, we're going to be less competitive. Products are going to be more expensive for consumers in the United States and in Mexico, and you're going to create the basis for policies of sovereign and protectionist concepts to hold and take the day. That's a very dangerous situation we are facing right now. More when we mention to you that even in agricultural exports, Mexico has won a lot of things. Of all these different articles that you have right there, you can see the percentages. In tomatoes, we have 88% of the total tomato consumption in the United States being supplied from Mexico. So you look at each one of these products. Strawberries, 99% of all strawberries consumed in the United States basically come from Mexico. So when you look at these things, you say, wait a minute, what are we talking about? What are we talking about that the integration didn't work, that what we are doing in NAFTA didn't work, that the neoliberal policies didn't work? They are working, not only in the manufacturing sector, they're also working in the agricultural sector. Because I can put you the contrary of this one. And by the way, this one doesn't come from me, this is from the USDA, okay? So, and the key question is, why would you enjoy having strawberries being produced in the United States? If we stop sending them to you, the price of strawberries is going to go high up very quickly in the United States. Now, you may like the berries. I happen to like them, okay? But it is interesting because the opposite side of this coin is the fact that corn, sorghum, soybean, are all of them produced in the United States and imported into Mexico to the tune that more than 60% of total consumption of Mexican corn, soybean, etc., is produced in the United States. So you have a tremendous integration between the two economies. Each one is specializing in what it does best. And as a result of that, consumer prices have gone down. Production levels have increased, and satisfaction and welfare for the population has improved. Some people don't realize that, and they assign these problems to liberal or neoliberal policies, when in fact has nothing to do with that. It has to do with monopolies and concentration of power in certain industries. Mexico is now thought as a very potentially good economy. The Global Manufacturing Competitiveness Index of the global CEO of Deloitte gives Mexico the 8th place and projects it to be the 7th most efficient economy in manufacturing by the year 2020. But look at the number one. The number one, China, except that by 2020, what Deloitte is assuming is that the United States is going to be the most efficient, most productive economy in manufacturing in terms of competitiveness in the world. Is that the way the Americans feel? No. The way Americans feel is China is overwhelming us and is going to be destroying our industrial manufacturing bases. Mexico is destroying us and is going to be overwhelming our manufacturing base. When you look at the analysis being made by these companies, it's exactly the opposite. The United States regains its competitiveness, and Mexico and China remain there, because we are the countries that are making this difference. I close this part by telling you one thing. If we were able to integrate more as nations, you will have a very competitive regional basis between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. That was the purpose of NAFTA. That is the purpose of NAFTA. And we're about to destroy it because of conceptions being made by whoever is going to be running this country and my country in the coming years. That's the big danger. You can have then presidents in a confrontational basis rather than presidents in a joint effort to bring more competitiveness to the region. What we have been doing, though, is losing growth potential in the Mexican economy. And so whoever wants to be president of Mexico, whoever is going to be discussing something, has to really look at this as the serious problem of the Mexican economy. As years have gone by, the potential GDP of Mexico has gone down from 2.7% in the year 2012 to 2.3% in the year 2016. In fact, the Mexican government right now is very happy because they are thinking that this year, lo and behold, we're going to be growing 2.3%. Because at the beginning of the year, we're thinking of growing only 1.9%. Now, when you talk about these numbers, it's really very, very strange, because the rate of growth that Mexico needs for the country to really develop itself correctly, have this increase in salaries that everybody would like to get, is between 5 and 6% average per year. So 2.3% is nothing. And this is exactly why salaries are so depressed in Mexico, because we have less jobs being created than people looking for those jobs in our economy. Normally, we used to send these people to the United States. Since 2 years back, the rate of net migration between Mexico and the United States is zero. In fact, it's becoming a negative number. More Mexicans are going back to Mexico than coming into the United States. These are all myths that are right there, which are being exploited for political purpose rather than being looked at seriously in terms of what happens. The real fact is the Mexican economy is less competitive and every time is losing this number. So despite what people look and say, the reality tells me that I need to do something if I want to change that. What should be then the discussion in the political arena in Mexico should be how to turn around this number. Now, why are we losing faith in the Mexican economy? First, because we have done a terrible job in terms of the fiscal performance in the past 5 years. We are very inefficient in the use of resources in Mexico. The public sector investment program is terrible, not only in terms of losing the amount of money that we're spending, but in addition, the way you use resources. And that goes to one of the strong issues that will have to be discussed in the Mexican process, the political process, is corruption. Because what you have there, the name socavón, which you have no idea what it is, maybe the ones who are from Mexico, but socavón implies that one of the last investments that were made by the Mexican government, which was a road bypassing the city of Cuernavaca so that you can go from Mexico City all the way to Acapulco and enjoy a weekend in a nice way, rather than going through the city of Cuernavaca, that will make you lose 1 hour extra of time. They built this incredible bypass at a cost which originally was 1.1 billion pesos and ended up costing 2.2 billion pesos. The result of that was a nice road, which was highlighted by the government as the major accomplishment in terms of infrastructure development in Mexico in the past 10 years. 5 months later, it collapsed. And it collapsed because they forgot to look underneath and see whether all the drainage system was in shape. So they didn't look at the drainage system, as a result of which, once the cars started going through there, they were collapsing these tubes that were underground, holding all the drainage, and all of a sudden, those tubes just gave in, and the whole place collapsed. As it collapsed, it made a huge hole, which was not because of the earthquake, okay? I mean, if it had been the earthquake that just had right now, probably they would have saved the day. But because there was no earthquake on that day, the collapse of the place was attributed to what it should be, corruption. Because the person who was supposed to be supervising this process was someone who had no idea of engineering. And therefore, the supervisor of the process of the whole project was a person who had no idea what he or she should be looking for. The biggest problem in Mexico, therefore, is you become corrupt, not only in terms of stealing money, which is this conception everybody has, but by the fact that you are now appointing political appointees to do the job that should be done by experts in the field. Not only did we spend twice as much as we should have to build this road, in addition, because the one team of people who are supervising the construction was not competent because they had no idea about engineering, you then had the collapse. Corruption is manifested in many, many ways, okay? And one of them is I appoint my friends to do the job that should be done by an expert. One of the tough things that we should be discussing now during the political process in Mexico is, are you going to go back to appointing the right people to supervise the infrastructure projects of the government, or are you going to be appointing political appointees all along the way? Secondly, in Mexico, the public sector debt has increased at the rate of 1 trillion pesos per year. Okay? That implies that the Mexican government has borrowed about basically 4 points of GDP every year. So the increase in the debt of the Mexican government has gone up from 39% of GDP to 49% of GDP in 4 years. Those 10 points is a tremendous increase in the public sector debt. The service of that debt, as interest rates go up, are very, very expensive, and they take away resources for their needs in the country. Third, Inflation is going up. We are right now basically at an inflation rate of almost 7% in Mexico, which is very high for standards that we have had for the past years. Now, of course, if someone remembers the old good golden age of inflation in Mexico, then you are happy, because at the time there was between 50 and 100%. But if you look at inflation for the past 20 years, well, basically 10 years, you had an inflation rate of no more than 3%. You are now twice as much and going up. So there are mistakes that have been made in terms of what people do and the policies they are doing. And of course, the reaction to NAFTA is also creating these conditions of uncertainty in the country. There you can see the numbers. What is very impressive, another one I can do this one, I don't know which one is the, well, what is very impressive right there is that the rate of tax that the Mexican company pays, or a company established in Mexico, is 52%. Why? Because of all the different things that we add in terms of what is called Social Security, etc., that the company has to pay. So we are one of the most expensive countries for doing business as a company in the world. So when you talk about this unfair situation of companies, you have to think about this. In terms of the tax rate that the company ends up paying for all the different elements is 50% in Mexico. You know, the United States is 40%, so you are in good company, but let's assume, without accepting, that one of the things that Mr. Trump really accomplishes is a reduction of the tax rate for companies, for firms going down from what you have right now to, let's say, 25%, not to go to the 15% that Mr. Trump would like to have as tax rate. Those 10 points of difference will imply that the incentive to do business in Mexico will be much smaller than before. Just there, you have a problem in Mexico, because if you are increasing your debt at the rate of 1 trillion pesos per year, which is roughly 2.5, 3 points of GDP, can you then do the cutting in your expenditures to reduce tax rates on businesses? And the answer probably is no. So if the United States were to do that, which I hope not, then the result in Mexico will be that we will be in a very difficult situation, because unless we adapt and adjust our expenditure, we will not be able to reduce. These are the kind of discussions that should be taking place in Mexico rather than the ones that we're having right now. Because in the end, the adjustment of the public sector in terms of what they are doing is, since the servicing of the debt keeps increasing, and you can see the numbers going up and up and up, then you are adjusting the deficit on the basis of public sector investment, which has gone down to 11.3% in the total public expenditures, and you can see how that has gone down, whereas the expenditure in current expenditures remains practically the same. So the whole adjustment of the public finances in Mexico is being made on the basis of reducing investment and not reducing current expenditures. The Mexican economy has a tremendous problem right there, and whoever is going to be running for president has to think, what is he or she going to do in terms of this disequilibrium in the long term? This is how the debt has increased. You can see how it has gone from 35% of GDP in the year 2013 to 48% of GDP in the year 2016. If you were to have something like this in the United States, you know, growing basically 12 points of GDP in 4 years, 3 points per year, you will be in a very dangerous situation. Mexico is. And there has to be a discussion in Mexico on how is the next president going to handle this, because that is a major concern for the economy and for the competitiveness of our country. What is it that NAFTA gave to Mexico? Foreign direct investment. If you look at the flows, this is really what has happened, because what you have is the rest of the world, the yellow bar, has been increasing its investment in Mexico because they want to produce in Mexico to sell into the United States market. As a result of that, the Mexican economy has modernized, the manufacturing sector has gotten the levels of competitiveness that you saw before, and the danger of not negotiating correctly NAFTA for Mexico is not current production levels. It's really attracting foreign direct investment into the nation. That is a major concern. For a president who understands globalization, this is the concern. For a president who does not understand globalization, he doesn't care. Because in the end, what he's going to do is he's going to think about, I'm going to be substituting this by investment from the government. For a president who wants to do that, does not understand that we have a situation of public finances which do not allow you to do it, then you're going to be in a very critical situation. Whoever wins the Mexican presidency, therefore, better understands the equilibrium between public finances, foreign direct investment, servicing the debt, and the possibility of having this country grow on the basis of external investment and opening the economy. If the next president thinks that what we should be doing is closing this place, then we are going to be in a crisis in Mexico pretty soon. That's part of why I am concerned, okay? Mr. Trump complains because of this. Last year we had $284 billion exports into the United States, $231 billion imports from the United States. The result is the one that you have heard Mr. Trump say many, many times. $63 billion surplus for Mexico, or in favor of Mexico. So, if the United States leaves NAFTA, will Mexico be doomed? And the answer is no. Because if worse comes to worse, we simply go into the WTO rules, World Trade Organization. If we were to go into that one, the average, import duty that will be imposed by the United States to Mexican exports will be 3.5%. That's the average. The average import duty that the Mexicans will impose to the American products will be 7.1%. Assuming, not true, but assuming that everything else remains the same, this implies that in terms of revenue produced by imports exports into Mexico, we will have to pay, in quotes, because who will be paying that will be you, the consumer in the United States, you will have to pay $10 billion. But we will be collecting $14 billion from the imports of your products into Mexico. Any normal citizen in Mexico will say, let's go for that, because it gives me $4 billion surplus. So even there is a mistaken concept that you will be winning by doing this, by leaving NAFTA. What you will be creating is simply an arithmetic number that will be positive to Mexico. And we will have $4 billion in addition to the $10 billion to provide with a fiscal credit all the companies producing in Mexico goods for the American market, in which case we will be providing the companies the amount of money required to be competitive and remain the prices at the level that will allow the products, even paying the 3.5%, to come into the United States. Unless the United States wants to do the same, which implies they will have to find $4 billion more to subsidize their own products, we will be able to do that and be happy. Now, this goes against all my instincts, but I can tell you, if that has to be done, then we can do this. And in the process of discussing these things in Mexico, the point I'm making to people is we will be able to sustain the process of production in the value chains that we have because we will have the resources to do that. If you take me to extremes, that's what you will get. Does it make sense? It doesn't make sense because you will be losing competitiveness. You will be doing all this through subsidies to the production process, which doesn't make sense to me. So what should Mexico do? Well, the first thing is you keep the energy reforms viable. What is crazy for any president or person who wants to propose to become president is to say that you're going to be moving backwards in terms of the energy reform. It doesn't make sense. This is exactly what we should be doing, the energy reform, and keep going on. So the biggest problem here is, am I producing enough? As you can see, these are the levels of production of barrels of oil, which goes down to 1 million barrels of oil that we can export a year. Now, what is it that we would like to do? Have more people come. You want to do that? You already opened the energy market. You want to add that into the NAFTA? Makes sense. You can do that and add it into the NAFTA agreement, but what will that imply? That you're giving an advantage, an extra advantage to the United States producers above the rest of the world producers. And that will imply that companies in Houston will be the beneficiaries of that policy. Because what it will imply to companies here is, since I'm already one of the leading producers in terms of the oil, then I can now take advantage of an agreement that will give me an extra advantage over the rest of producers in the world. So it will make sense to add this in a NAFTA 2 agreement or whatever name you want to give to it. If you don't, then that's fine. I show you what we can do as Mexico, and then what it will imply here is you can compete with the rest of the world on an equal term basis. I'm not going to give you any extra advantage because we are no longer partners. For a region like Houston, this is a major issue, okay? Because there is tremendous possibilities of doing business in Mexico if you have the extra advantage of being part of NAFTA rather than being part of the general agreement that we have at this point. Mexico needs to reduce rules and regulations. The cost of all the rules and regulations that we have in Mexico to companies doing business in Mexico is about 2.7% of GDP. We can really create conditions just by reducing rules and regulations. If we do that as part of the program of any government, then you will have Mexico going up from the 54th place that it occupies right now to something closer to the United States, 16%. You have to improve the educational standards. The Mexican students' performance is among the lowest in the OECD nations. We are 3 years behind in mathematics at the end of secondary education. The Mexican system is not creating or producing the workforce, the labor force, that really becomes competitive in modern times. So that's another issue that we have to discuss and put together in this next presidential election. Then you have to look at the future rather than the past. Look at the things that we are doing right now. If you look at the businesses which are going to be disappearing, telemarketing is going to disappear because we don't do that anymore, okay? So 99% of those in 2 decades are going to disappear. Then, accountants and auditors, 94% of probability of disappearing. Then sellers in stores, 92%. Technical writers, 87%. Agents for selling houses, 86%. Why? Because all of these jobs are changing. You do many of these things. Many people don't use. My daughter doesn't go to a store anymore. Everything she does on computer. Not necessarily Amazon, although Amazon seems to be the preferred company in the United States. My daughter lives in Austin, Texas, by the way. So what she does is she never goes to a store anymore. And she walks there and takes her kids and put them in front of the screen and tells them, okay, I'm going to get into this thing, check, and tell me what you like. As these things keep moving, there is going to be 3D now, projection. So you can really get the whole image out and look at it around. You don't have to go to a store. Well, some of us enjoy going to stores, okay? But mostly, people are not going to be doing that. So many of these jobs are going to be gone. The ones that are important for Mexico is architectural design, automotive design, parts of defense industry, and the aerospatial. These are the industries of the future, and this is what should be the industrial policy of anyone who wants to become president of Mexico. By the way, this is what should be the industrial policy in the United States. That's the reason why Mr. Macron, president of France, walked out and said publicly, after Mr. Trump had said that we're going to go back to manufacturing, said, okay, to all the scientists in the United States, France has an open arms policy. Come to our country. We even will speak English with you guys. So, eliminate monopolies. The cost in Mexico of monopolies is very high. And telecoms is one of the worst in terms of what we have. Improve security. This is a very dangerous situation right now in Mexico, it's true. We have been losing in terms of security. Homicide, kidnapping, extortion have all increased in Mexico. What you see on the graph on the left is the perception in the Mexican population of security. It has gone to 73% basically of all the population 18 years or older feel insecure wherever they are walking or doing things in Mexico. This is a major concern, and it's something that has to be dealt with good policies. It's not by taking the army to the streets, it's by creating a police force that makes sense. That's what we are lacking and what we have to build in Mexico. Just to give you an idea, even the Mexican National University is spending more and more in security. What you can see there is the increase in expenditures of UNAM, the National University, from the year 2005 to the year 2016. It has gone from 167 million pesos to 440 million pesos. If I'm using the money for that, I'm not using the money for education. If Rice, I have no idea how much they spend in security, but if Rice increases the expenses in security, it implies that they are not doing scholarships or other things that should be the role of education. And it's really affecting our private sector investments in Mexico because 32% of people who make investments, business people, express that extortion and insecurity is the most important issue for them to continue to do investments in our country. This comes from KPMG 2017 survey that they just did. And of course, your government is now issuing all these strange things where they will tell tourists not to go here and there and whatever. Look at that. They are now talking about Cancun. They are talking about Los Cabos. You cannot continue to have this problem with security. It's a major issue that will have to be discussed and real proposals presented by whoever wants to be president of Mexico in the future. Impunity. We just made a study in the university, and we found out that Mexico is no longer next to last in terms of the worst situation of impunity in the world. But that's because last year we could only account for 59 countries, and we got the 58th place. Now we were able to go to 69 countries, and we got the 66th place. Impunity is a major problem in Mexico. It's not corruption, it's impunity. It's the fact that you can commit almost any type of whatever you can think, and you will only be gotten 0.7% of the times. Only 7 of delitos, I forgot the name in English now, of crimes that are committed in Mexico, only 7 of every 100 are denounced. Out of those, only 10% reach conclusion in a sentence in the judicial system. When you look at this combination, you find out that if you have 7 out of 100 crimes, only the ones that are being denounced, and you get only 10% of that, only 0.7% of all crimes committed in Mexico reach a sentence at the end of the day. You cannot have worse than that. Well, maybe you do. There are 3 countries which are worse. But, from the perspective of Mexico, you need to change that. You have to finish what we call the chain of impunity. And that goes through the process of investing more in better police force and investing more in better judicial system. Judges. We only have in Mexico 4 judges per 100,000 inhabitants. When you think about that, you have to think the following. In Latin America, there is 8 judges per 100,000 inhabitants, twice the number in Mexico. Then you go and you use the average in the world, 16 judges per 100,000 inhabitants, 4 times. Then you go to Europe, 23 per 100,000, 6 times. And then you finally go to the best country in terms of no impunity in the world, which is, to your surprise, Croatia. And Croatia has 45 judges per 100,000 inhabitants, 11 times the Mexican rate. Why is Croatia the best country in terms of non-impunity in their institutions? Because at the end of this famous USSR situation, when they got independence and they went through the Balkans wars, once they ended up the war, they had to rebuild and reconstruct all their institutions, and they were helped by the European Union. So they started from scratch, and they have created the best system in terms of police, in terms of this security, in terms of the judicial system in the world. You will be surprised. 10, you can see them right here on the right: Croatia, Bulgaria, Slovenia, Sweden, Norway, Montenegro, Czech Republic, and Greece are the top countries in terms of this situation. You can read where the United States is, looking at these things, but you're very low there. Why? Because at the local level, there are a lot of actions that happen in the United States that go impune, particularly at the level of the local police and actions that they take in certain aspects. Mexico is practically, if you can see that on the left, we are the 4th worst country in the world. That leads to corruption. That's why we are poorly classified in terms of the money laundering, in terms of the misuse of public resources. We have inefficiency and corruption happening. And we also need to pay better salaries. This is the rate of salaries in the automotive industry in the world. And what is ridiculous is that whereas dollars per hour for someone working in the automotive industry in the United States is 23.8, in Mexico is 3.3. That is a little bit normal. Why do I say a little bit normal? Because it is normal that you will pay less in Mexico than in the United States. What it is not normal is that you are paying 3.3 and that countries like Brazil are basically twice the rate that we have in Mexico. So the least that we could say is that there is a problem in Mexico that we need to address in terms of the salary results, so that you can bring the salaries of people at least twice as high as you are facing right now in the country. Because otherwise this is what happens. What happens is this is the inequality of income distribution in Mexico. The green part right here says that 1% of the richest of the population in Mexico owns 40% of total income in the country. Whereas on the other side, the blue one says 90% of the population has 36% of the income. With this income distribution and inequality, you don't have a society that really can consume better, produce better, live better in our country. So this is another issue that has to be addressed by the next administration. Because that's the only way that you will avoid what I call economic populism, made in Mexico, protect the local industry, growth by public spending, and political authoritarianism, which is a strong leader is required, national unity should prevail, the institutions should serve the people. This is the risk of the next election, that we may end up with someone that will be catered to the large population in this context. This is what I think we should go. A country where you have independent courts, where you have tolerance to all ways of living, free press, full access to public information to all members of society, and the subordination of the armed forces to institutions of the civil society. If we don't have these 5 elements, Mexico will not become the democracy that we would like to have in the southern part of the United States. And that, to me, is the biggest deal. So, why is it happening right now in the relationship? What we're facing right now is the PRI as the group of people who now own the country, who are handling the economy, who are absolutely corrupt to the point that they will not be winning the next election. There is no way that the Mexican population will accept another PRI people, given the results of this current government. That rules out, whether people like it or not, the possibility of a coalition between the PRI and the PAN. PAN is not going to be able to reach an agreement, mostly because even though we may have similarities in the concept of what policies we should be doing, we should not link ourselves to a party which is now the epitome of corruption in the country. The level of corruption that we have seen in this administration have never been seen before. Quite different to say that we were not corrupt in the administration of PAN. It's just the level, the amounts, the easiness with which they simply say, no problem. That, right now, is the one thing that the Mexican population is putting as number one issue. Wherever I go and talk to people, and I ask them, what are the two issues that you think and feel should be dealt with? Number one, immediately, corruption. Number two, insecurity. These are the two items that people keep telling me over and over again. So that rules that out. That leaves PAN thinking, what kind of combination should I do? Because, yeah, my mark is not as good. My brand is not as good as it used to be in the past. So whom am I going to be meeting with? PRD, the moderate left. And people say, well, this is crazy. I mean, you are right, and you're going to have a combination with the moderate left. Yes, because at least we don't have the levels of corruption that you will see in a link with the PRI. What you see right now in Mexico is that happening right now. There was an agreement between the three parties, the PRD, left, the PAN, right, and Movimiento Ciudadano, Citizens Movement, which is a pragmatic party, okay? It's not left, it's not right, it's a pragmatic party. What they want is they want to grow. There are now conversations of other parties asking whether they can join this type of coalition. If it happens, it will be very difficult for anyone who is not in this coalition to win. Because the one thing you have to remember is, in Mexico, winner takes all. That's the rule. So if I win with 36%, I am the winner. Winner takes all. That is the rule in Mexico. Well, that's also the rule in the United States. Winner takes all, even if it's not the winner. So in a context, what you have to understand is that our situation is even worse than what you faced in the United States. Because what is going to happen in Mexico is you're going to have a minority government winning the election. And then it's going to try to act as if it had won the majority, which is exactly the mistake that we have been making for the past 3 sexennios. Fox wins the election with 42% of the vote. That implies 58% of the population voted against him, of those who went to vote, okay? Next, Calderon, he wins with 34.6%. That implies 65% of the population voted against him, and he behaved as if he had won. And this gentleman right now, Peña Nieto, wins with 36% of the vote, and he behaves as if he had won with more than 50%, when 64% of the population voted against him. What is the one thing that he did right and that people did right? They created what was called the Pacto for Mexico, that is, this combination of parties putting together their people in Congress so that you will get the votes required to approve the reforms that we have been asking for the past 20 years in Mexico. That's an act of intelligent policy. And then, immediately after, appears the Time magazine front page, Saving Mexico. And in that page, the president of Mexico shows himself as the savior of Mexico and breaks the coalition. As a result of which, after that moment and some corruption issues in between, you have not been able to rule the country anymore. Because what you did is you destroyed the coalition that had put together this pact for Mexico, which had indeed changed the reforms. When it became, I'm going to be now applying the reforms, and I want to take all the credit, what you got immediately was a reaction from the other party saying, okay, then we don't play the game anymore, and I'm going to let you do it by yourself, and I'm going to be again in the opposition. What it is important now for Mexico is not only how you win an election, it's how you govern the country. And what is going to be more important than winning the election is whether you have the coalition to govern the country correctly as of the 1st of December of next year. So in fact, that is what we should be looking at. If you want this, you need a coalition that will govern the country. You can no longer think that you can govern the country just by yourself. We are a country of minorities now, not of majorities, and we need to build a majority in this coalition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think we have a little time for a couple of questions. The floor is open. Yeah.
If you want to have raising the salaries in the automotive industry, the companies that are who are giving the salaries today are all the U.S. companies that came to Mexico for the lower salaries. How do you convince them that it's in their benefit to double the salary of their workers to make life better for the Mexican people?
That cannot happen unless you do it in a general sense, okay? I mean, there's no way that you can walk to one company or one industry and tell them you have to increase your salaries just because I say so. So what you have to do, and the one thing that we are doing right now, basically, let me declare one thing. I'm a neoliberal, okay? But I'm a very strange neoliberal. So what I'm going to be doing is saying, you need to increase the minimum wage so that that number, which becomes the floor, by pushing it up, you will be forcing the others to increase. Now, do you want to go twice? No. All I want is increases in the salaries that will put us slowly but surely in the route to become at least the best paid country in terms of those salaries for these industries, which are the industries of the future, okay? You can do it, yes, but then what they will ask you is, okay, what am I getting in return? And that's where the fact that you will be reducing all these rules and regulations to do business in Mexico will start making the difference, because what you will do there is, yes, you can pay more because I'm going to be reducing the cost of the bureaucracy. You can do more because I can lower the taxes, and those are the exchange that I will give you. This is the quid pro quo that I will be giving people. By doing that, how can you do that? You have to look at the social programs that we have in Mexico. Social programs in Mexico represent approximately right now 15% of GDP. Each point of GDP is worth 200 billion pesos, okay, which roughly in dollars will be $10 billion, okay? So what you need to do is you need to go there, look at those programs, reduce the excess that you are facing for many political reasons, and use that money to reduce taxes, at which point the companies will understand that salary is not what they should be in Mexico, but rather productivity and the fact that they will make more profits by being more efficient, both in terms of rules and regulations and taxes. That's the policy. By definition, you can then pay higher salaries, because salaries do not represent such a large portion of the building of a car. Anyway.
Great presentation. One of the things that I think is a tremendous asset of the United States system is civic life, is participation by the citizenry in things that are important to civic life, through charitable donations, through volunteerism. I mean, you just saw what happened with the hurricane and all this inflow of money by private parties to help support people. non-governmental action. It seems to me there are two great assets in Mexico, in addition to all the other great assets. One of them is the proximity to the biggest market in the United States. That's clearly a humongous competitive advantage for Mexico globally. The other thing I think is the asset of the U.S. Mexican American population, which wants Mexico to succeed. I wonder if the political leadership and the governmental leadership and the university leadership in Mexico have thought, how do you harness through today social media, through the use of clicks to get money, funding, support to fight things like impunity and like corruption and support a more vibrant civic life in Mexico. I wonder, it's a humongous asset, the U.S. Mexican population, and the role, for instance, of the Mexico Center and in thought leadership in the United States. It's an asset that no other country has. That ought to be harnessed. I wonder what your thoughts are on how to creatively harness this tremendous asset in the United States.
I'm going to steal something from one of my competitors, okay? Because I don't mind. One of the things that Ernesto Rufo is saying, which is another person you're also running, and I think he's right in that way. He says, look, if we can encourage the fact that we take the civil society and create structures or groups to look at, to supervise, really, that's the point, through civic action, the way that the government is spending money, etc., then you can have groups of 10 people and slowly create cells that will increase in the analysis and evaluation of public expenditures, the way that people do business, etc., in the government side. If you do that, then society itself becomes the controller of the whole process, okay? There is one mistake in that. I agree with that, but there is one mistake. The only way that you're going to do that is if I give you the information. So the one thing I'm going to do, that I can tell you for sure, is total open information process so that you can have the information required to evaluate me. Because the point and the reason why people don't do what you are saying right now in Mexico is because they don't trust the information they are getting. So the only way that I can be able to create the kind of civic action that you mentioned is by creating an opening of total information. So the information legislation we have in Mexico will have to be modified so that there is no way that I can hide at any level of government public information from the public. Now, this is something people hate to do, okay? No matter what government in what country, you try to, whatever helps me, you should know, whatever doesn't, you shouldn't. You need, therefore, to make a legislation that will create a condition whereby all information is free and accessible to everybody without any requirement or any need to justify it. Once we go into that, which I call total transparency, then you will do it. Now, why can you do it? Because I'm not involved in any of these things. One of the reasons why I'm an interesting candidate, because I've been away from government 8 years. Basically, I don't have a long tail to be step on, okay? I have a small one, okay?
I think one of the keys to anything, whether it's growth or productivity, is education. In this country, if we want to be educated, we can. So how do you fix that problem in Mexico? Because that is the key, I believe, to success in any aspect.
There are two reasons why we have problems in Mexico right now in education. One of them is you need to reform as it's been put together, the educational reform. One of the things that educational reform lacks is competition. So the biggest problem that we're facing right there is how can you create conditions where all the kids who are not getting the right education or are not getting a place in the educational system can have access to that in a competitive fashion. The way to do that is taking advantage of the structure of the private sector education system that already exists in Mexico, which has excess capacity. They are not using it. And then rather than building new schools and new things for kids with with the public sector being the one that provides education, give it to the private sector. Is difficult? Yes. because there is a political issue right there, okay? But it is easy because you have already the capacity established, both from kindergarten all the way to university. What will you tell these people in the private sector? I'm going to give you the kids, but they are going to be paying what it costs me as government send the kid into a public institution. So no more nor less, the advantage for you is you have excess capacity and going to be filling that excess capacity. The advantage for me is I don't have to pay more bureaucrats because I will be using your schools and your professors as part of the system. The advantage for the system is there is going to be competition. Because what's going to happen now is, as more and more kids have access to that level of education, either the public sector education increases its levels, or you're going to start having a tremendous complaint from parents on this side asking for the same level of education that the other kids are getting. Because now it's no longer a discussion between private and public, okay? It's a discussion of, I want to have access to that kind of education. So you can then raise the levels in the public sector education by creating the evaluation process that will require to do that. I'm not trying to kill public education. All I'm saying is that will increase the level of competition. Why do I know that you can do that? Because we're already doing it in Baja California, okay? So it has been already done in the state government of Baja California for the past 15 years. So the question is, if you already have done these things, why don't you just increase it in terms of the overall institution? That's the long-term solution, okay? The short-term solution, you have a problem. You have about, depends who you believe, but right now in Mexico there is between 5 to 9 million ninis. I don't know how you say that in English. Is that the same thing? Ninis, okay.
Neither study nor work.
Neither study nor work, okay? It's not the same as N-E here, but it's N-I, it's nini. Sounds the same way. You have that amount of kids between basically 17 to 25 years of age. They're already there. They already finished their studies, whatever they got, okay? So these ninis, you have to bring them into the productive force. So I talked to people in the aerospace and automotive industries and some other industries, and I told them, look, what if we get these kids slowly? You cannot bring, 9 million in one jump, but what if we bring these kids and we put them in an apprentice program? Real apprentice, not like the ones we have in TV here, okay? So you bring people, and you put them into this program, and I will pay them the equivalent. I will pay them, the kids, not the enterprise, not the firms, okay? I will pay the kids the same amount that will cost me to put them into training centers or institutions. I don't want to build more bureaucracy, okay? What I want to do is a program where you will certify them as having the abilities in a 1 year or 2 year program. That will be a certificate that you will provide. I will supervise. I will pay the kid. And they will get, in this year or 2 years, depends on the industry, the abilities, the competencies that are required. Once you do that, they will graduate. You can either hire them at the end, or you can let them go. And you become my school if you want to be that. That's fine. I have no problem. Why do I know that will work? Because it costs the company zero. So whatever they produce is going to be productivity gain. As they train them, these kids are going to be more and more productive, and they will have zero cost for them for 1 or 2 years. That will increase productivity in the company. That will increase, therefore, profits. That will increase the ability of the kid, the competences, and at the end of this kid, he will then go into the market, and the market will have to pay higher salaries to them. You want to increase salaries? That's the way to do it. And slowly you will build this. Now, we have a tremendous pool in Mexico, which applies. This is a program for many years, okay? It's not a program for, I don't know how many we can put in there, but let's say 500,000 per year or whatever. The result of that is you are going to be training people, you're going to give them the abilities, the competences, and they will be also consumers. Because what I can do as government is I can allow them to get the 12,000 pesos, which is pretty much my estimate of what will be the salary per month, given the cost I have in the institutions of education, and no taxes, because it's a special program. So you have kids all of a sudden which are making $700, $600 per month tax-free. Now you may think it's very little, because you are thinking in American terms, okay? But in Mexico, that's a good salary. Kids will then be having dignifying jobs. Their lives will be dignified, which is also important. You want to give them a value for their lives, and slowly they will become trained. If you put this program, and these programs work in Europe, okay? If you put these programs and keep doing it, kids will be very productive, salaries will rise, productivity will increase, growth will increase in the country. That I can assure you is going to happen. So you have a short-term solution and a long-term solution.
I'll take the next few questions together. So I'm going to give you a paper and a pen. So you can write them down. Very good.
I have a pen, I don't have a
And
pen.
so you can have it, then put them together and give an answer. Yeah, here, and here, and here.
And that's the way I'm going to answer, here.
Thank you for your presentation. I actually have two questions myself, but they're brief. Your final remarks about the coalition and a minority government ruling allude a little bit to the second round, which was debated a lot in Mexico recently, even though it's not applicable for these next elections. But just wanted to know your thoughts around that. And then with regards to the energy reform, you mentioned about Manuel López Obrador talking about a referendum to counter it, which is probably not a viable option either. But how do you actually ensure that the current administration says that it's guaranteed, but how do you make sure that the energy reform is stable and here to last?
Great. Here.
You mentioned about the coalition. Do you find it peril when you make a coalition that you cannot really govern because of different interests in the coalition, and ultimately you have to choose what you want to do?
Here.
You talked about corruption and lack of security. My specific question is regarding something that Mr. Trump loves to talk about, narcotraficantes and the Sinaloa cartel and the impact that they have not only in Mexico but also in the United States in terms of dealing with that major issue.
Okay, I'll gather this one.
Just one quickly that nobody has there to ask at this point in time. And I see Andres Manuel's base, and I look at Trump's base, and it's pretty similar. So what he's trying to appeal in the voter has not been addressed, and I'm not saying it's not right or wrong, but the 40, 50 million people in poverty in Mexico, those ones that when they lost the crops to U.S., they were not growing strawberries or tomatoes, they were growing corn. So they actually got out of a job, and now they have nowhere else to go. Those are the ones that Andres Manuel is appealing to. So I understand that you want to make a coalition so you can actually get there. But I wouldn't discount just being close to that audience. It's like you mentioned Back to the Future. I assure you that if Secretary Clinton could go back in time, she would pay more attention to the fact that they underestimate the power of that voter base. And that plan is great, but I will do something, you and your party, to appeal to the people, which is more in need of the actual change, though.
There, and then here, and then there. And last.
Señor Derbez, mucho gusto. I wanted to ask, first of all, I wanted to see if you could clear up something for us. You say that there is an increase in the public debt in Mexico. As I understand it, the public debt in Mexico increased because of the devaluation of the peso, and most Mexican debt is valued in dollars and euros. So if you could clear that up for us. Number two, you say that there is an increase in inequality, or there is a large inequality in Mexico, but at the same time, you say that you want to decrease taxes. So how would it work when it comes to decreasing inequality and at the same time decreasing taxes for the very rich, and especially these monopolies like Carlos Slim and things like that? And then just one last thing, talking about the coalition, which I think is the most important part coming to 2018 and the election in June. In 2018, you have this coalition of the PAN, the PRD. Most of the PRD has just shelled out. There's nothing left in the PRD. Most of the actual senators that were part of the PRD, when the PRD decided to move into the coalition with the PAN, they left to Morena, which now has become much, much stronger. And I do share your fears of this, demagogue and a bit of a, I don't agree with Lopez Obrador, but how can we, combat Lopez Obrador when he has become so strong, especially, in Congress with his new PRD base coming to him?
I agree with you that monopolies are detrimental to the economy. So if you're elected, what kind of laws would you enact to bust up these monopolies?
And last.
Just a clarifying question on potential pan-PRD coalition. How would that work in particular with economic policy? I understand something like free press, independent judiciary, freedom of information, but when you're arguing cutting taxes, cutting regulations, and cutting spending, how can that be reconciled with PRD?
Okay, quickly, coalition is here 5 times, so that's easy. There is a need of a second round? Yes. Can it be done in the next election? No. Therefore, we are what we are. We are stuck with what we have. We have to go for a coalition. We have to understand that you are going to be a minority no matter what, okay? Should the coalition then propose a second round? In my opinion, yes. One of the points that should be put together in the program will be a second round next time around, so we have legislation that will be approved. Immediately present to the people that this is what we are going to be doing, okay? And the second round makes sense? Yes, it makes sense. We don't like it because it implies I may not win. Yeah, well, tough luck. That's what you need to do. Why can I have a coalition? Because there are so many things in common. We have insecurity issues that we work together, no problem. We have even economic issues that we should be putting together. Both hate monopolies, okay? Both PAN, PRD, and Movimiento Ciudadano, don't forget this third party because it's important in terms of the overall coalition. All of us feel that it's time now to make changes there. All of us feel also that we have to provide some kind of program so that you will be helping people get jobs, get better education, etc. So you have a core. And one of the reasons why I think I'm a very good candidate, by the way, right now, is in my party I'm left. In the PRD, I'm right, which implies I'm in the center, okay? So looking at that option, you can create a program that will be a central issues program. I'm going to give you an example of the most difficult of all the issues, abortion, okay? If you are in my party, you are against abortion. If you are in the PRD, you are for abortion. So let's not talk about that. Let's talk about something which really makes sense. If you want to have less abortions, okay, then you have to have less pregnancies. So the whole point of this combination is people are going to have an abortion because they didn't want to be pregnant, or because it was, whatever, okay, you did it wrongly or whatever. So giving education to people on how to avoid pregnancy is something that we can put together. Both parties can have a clear issue on that one. So the issue of abortion, that's not an issue for this government, okay? It's the issue of education, of safeguarding, of doing all the elements that will be required, that we should be putting together in that program. Abortion is something to be discussed by society at large, and not to be imposed by the government, or at least not in this round, okay? You can find many of these combinations, you will find the common ground that you can put the program. So the key element is, and that's the answer here, you have to add as a restriction, as an obligation, a program that will be agreed by the coalition before you reach that point. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I agree. It's very difficult to do it if we don't agree with that program. That includes economic issues, it includes social issues, it includes issues like the one I just talked right now. So we have to talk about that and do it. Now, that implies then that the government will have to be done that way, that you will be thinking of a government that will be a coalition government, and that has to go and pass through the definition of, if I am the majority party, then I need to think a coalition in terms of a broader aspect. How many senators, how many representatives you are going to have in the 2 chambers of Congress? how that's going to be combined. This is the common program. They will vote for that, whatever is required. There are things that are not common. We let them to be free to decide on their own merits, okay? But this is the common program that we're going to be putting together. At the same time, even though we don't have the figure, you have to reach a compromise, and will be in the cabinet, there is going to be positions that will be given to different parties. So you cannot go and say all the people from the PAN are going to be the ministers. No, you have to add some of these positions for that party, some of that positions for names. No, don't go for names. Go for abilities, what people, competence, what people should be doing. And then you give me your best, and that will be the person, okay? And then you have a government coalition. Is difficult to rule? Yes. What is it that the next president of Mexico needs to understand? He's not the owner of the company. He's the manager of the company, okay? If we understand that, then you can manage the government. It's going to be rough, it's going to be difficult, yeah, but you know, the alternative is even worse. So you have to think that way, and that's what I'm pushing very strongly. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to win that battle, but I'm pushing for that. Any reform, yes, people can backtrack. There's nothing written in stone, okay? So tough luck. What's the only way that it will happen? If you are convinced that it has to be done. But if you are not convinced, well, Andres Manuel is not convinced, and Manuel is against it from the beginning. So I can assure you there is going to be a backtracking. Oh, but there is all these rules and regulations and agreements, and yeah, you sign everything you want. In the end, you have something called NAFTA. And one person can decide to cancel NAFTA. Hey, wait, but we have all these agreements and we have these companies already making business. Yeah, but if he decides no, it's going to be no. What do you mean? I mean, everything can be backtracked. So don't trust nothing. You know, energy reform will work. But you can renege on many of these things. It will cost the country, yes. Okay? I'm not saying it won't cost the country. All I'm saying is you can do it. The Argentinian government defaulted on the bonds when Mrs. Kirchner, or Mr. Kirchner, whichever you want at the time, decided they will not pay the debt. And for the whole period of this government, and they lasted for a long, long time, they didn't pay the debt. And they went into all these long negotiations, and the country kept going on. Now, Macri comes on board, and he decides to pay. Fine. One said, I won't, the other one said, I will. The result is, internationally speaking, people love now Macri. But the Kirchners were very powerful in their time, and they governed Argentina, and Argentina kept going on and on and on without paying their debt. So that's all I'm saying. Now, if I am the president, of course I won't do that, but it depends who the president is going to be, what may happen. Now, you may convince him not to do it, but he may. In the end, it's his decision if that's the kind of person he is. Corruption and narco-traffickers. Look, I mean, this is a big problem. I mean, the problem that we're facing right there is very clear. You need to legalize the use of marijuana, okay? And that I already said publicly, so I'm saying here publicly. If you do that, you're going to take away 75% of the total income of these people, and you're going to pass that on to the government. Now, it's the same thing as cigarettes or alcohol, okay? It's just a question of how you manage that. Oh, but that's going to create the conditions for use of drugs in Mexico. I have news for you guys. The latest research done in Mexico about consumption of drugs in the country has shown that from 2% of the population having consumed drugs 15 years back, now is 16% and growing. Okay? So sorry. Yes, I know people suffer with all these things. Yes. We need to legalize that. We need to take away those resources, and we need then to transform that into a program where you will be providing education just as you do with tobacco and alcohol. And yes, there is going to be a group of population. The problem is now Mexico is a consumption country. All this nonsense that just the United States consumes, I have bad news for you guys. We do consume in Mexico. 16% of the population now has declared officially that they consume either marijuana or cocaine or other kind of drugs. So we are facing the same problems that you're facing here. This is no longer a question of whether I'm just letting people come through into the United States. I have a problem in my country and I have to deal with that problem. I have to solve that problem in Mexico. What you do, that's the American privilege. What we do is we need to solve that problem. We need to take resources away from this mafia. And we need to do it quickly and promptly. And I think that's how you're going to be attacking. Now, of course, zero corruption in the sense that do not hesitate in taking people into jail immediately. But you need to take away resources from these guys. And that's a key issue, whether we like it or not. And believe me, in my party, when I say these things, I am left, okay? Because I believe in these things, not as, I don't agree with consumption of drugs. I'm against it. But it's a reality, and we have to deal with it, both from the medical standpoint, from the legal standpoint, and from the resources standpoint. And you have to go for that legalization. Now, what's going to happen in the United States, I have no idea. But I cannot do the policies and these things based on what happens in the United States. Just like the United States should not be looking at these things in terms of what happens in Mexico. Now, we can work together. Sure, we have to work together in the other part, because the one thing that drug and narco traffickers have is they are an international system. And we can only deal with them by attacking them on an international basis. That requires cooperation between the United States, Mexico, and many other countries. We have to do that. But I also have to deal with my problem, and I have to deal that way. Well, crops and agricultural sector, yes, I like that a lot. The problem is, one thing is rural development, and the other thing is crop production. You want to have the levels of production and possibilities that you have in the United States, then what you do is you change the legal structure of ownership on the rural sector, because that's the key. The reason why I cannot be competitive in corn, sorghum, soybeans, etc., except in a few regions in the country, is because I need large tracts of land in order to technify the whole thing. I cannot do that with the legal situation. But what I can tell Mr. Trump is, guess who's the basis of furor? Voting. These people in the Midwest. I lived in Iowa, so I know these people in the Midwest. I like them a lot. My daughter was born in Iowa, okay? She's a Hawkeye. So the whole thing is, you look at these things and you say, look, I'll tell you what, I'm going to be opening the corn, blah, 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 market to Brazil, Argentina, and Australia. I like Australians. And I'm going to impose a tariff on all the products in the United States. So you want to be out of NAFTA? Be my guest. See what happens. That's a negotiating technique. But in terms of the agricultural sector, what I need to do is I need to walk to these people and say, I need to train you to give a better tool so that you can adapt to new things. The reason why we are so efficient in all these strawberries things and what have you is because they are labor intensive, but at the same time you use irrigation. Okay? So it's a combination. That cannot be happening too much, but we can do it. People who produce, who went to the crops of avocado and all that are making good salaries, good money. People who are working on the cornfields, they are losing money. It's a rural development problem. It's not an agricultural production problem. And I agree with you. The whole message there is, I'm going to be helping you. Yeah, sure. I mean, that politicians know how to do. Public debt in Mexico, part of it is devaluation, okay? Part of it is simply growth, because it has happened. They are indebting themselves more and more and more every year. They are spending like crazy. They are not generating the income they should. In this particular year, they are telling us that they were able to reach an equilibrium, and it's going to be a surplus in primary budget surplus. The reason we're having that one is because they had a transfer of 320 billion pesos from the central bank. And the reason why the central bank was able to transfer that amount of money is because they valued the reserves of the Banco de Mexico last year in December at 21 pesos per dollar. And they bought dollars during the whole year at 17 or 18. And then you had all this crazy situation. So you value the thing. What is the crazy situation? Mr. Trump won. He said many things, and the peso just went crazy. And once we reach normalization, it's back to 1795. So what's going to happen at the end of this year is you're going to reach a point where it's going to be 1850. I'm going to be optimistic. It may be 1750, but let's go for 1850. And the problem is now they started with 21, and now they're going to go to 18. So now they're going to be losing money, not making money. Because what's going to happen is they're going to value the reserves, and they used to value them at 21, now they're going to be valuing them at 18. When you look at that, there's going to be a loss of 3 pesos per dollar, which implies there's going to be a huge accounting loss, just as it was a huge accounting profit. But I'm playing this game. I'm using 320 billion to satisfy fiscal requirements. There is a problem. They need to clean up that. And while I'm at that, that implies I can get money from there and reduce. Because what I can do, since I have in about 12 to 14 points in social programs which have not solved poverty in Mexico for the past 30 years, then there is a lesson in that. It doesn't work. I need to switch and use more efficiently that money. That's a lot of money. That's about 40% of the total budget. That's right there in those programs. So we can reduce those expenditures and do it for other things. Let me try to finish. Competition law, I agree with that, but let me say this. There is going to be a major problem in Mexico in terms of the coalition, okay? I'm sorry I didn't bring that, because it's a nice cartoon. It's an excellent cartoon that I put in all the talks, but I mean, you are American, so I thought you wouldn't like to see rats jumping from one ship to another. It's a beautiful cartoon that has a boat which is sinking, and it says PRD, PRI, okay? And there's a bunch of rats, and they're all jumping to a small little boat that says Morena. Those rats are jumping. Yeah, that's true. Those are all the rats who left PRD. Okay? By the way, also PRI. So the question that people are asking is why? Well, Morena used to be PRD. In other words, López Obrador was the candidate of the PRD when there was no Morena, which implies he already had all the left with him. And he didn't win. Now he has been able to split the left. And the left now has Morena and PRD. And you will say, yeah, but PRD is only 10%. Yes, but that 10% he had before, because he was the candidate of PRD, and there was no Morena. So he mobilized all the left. It's exactly the opposite of what people are saying right now. In fact, he's losing that 10% from his usual base. And that's the one that we are winning if we make a coalition between PAN and PRD. So exactly the opposite of what people are saying is what is happening. He has less, and we have more. But people are thinking the other way around, because people think in a very linear way. I find that we are too Christians in this world, okay? We Christians see the world as a line. You are born, you go, you grow, and then you die, and you go to heaven. Some of us, maybe not, but the majority will go to heaven. If you go to Asia, if you go to Mexico, in the ethnic tribes, they don't think that way. They think in a circular fashion. So what happened to you is you grow, you die, and then you reborn and keep going around. That's just a question of how you see the world. We see the world in a line. People in other places see the world as a circle. I enjoy looking at things as a circle because it breaks patterns. Again, López Obrador has been the candidate of the left for the past 2 elections. He will be the candidate of less than that left in this election because he's losing a portion of the PRD, which is staying behind. Sorry, I have good news for you guys. He's going to be weaker in that sense. His probabilities are lower now than they were before. But what he has done is he has built this image that he is attracting everybody to his side, which is true, except for those who remember that he used to have all of them before. And now he only has 90%. His loss, my gain. I'm serious about this one, because that's what's happening. So don't worry about that.
Well, thank you very much. Who helped me? Thank you.